Gijs, I'm the founder of Open Up and a healthcare psychologist. And with Open Up, we try to make mental health as accessible as possible. And we do that all over Europe. We have a partnership with the student hotel. That means that we keep these masterclasses in the several student hotels all over Europe. We're now in Berlin, very happy to be in Berlin. There are people here in the audience and there will be people on the live stream. We will take 25 minutes to talk about happiness. And of course, happiness is such a big subject that it's very difficult to bring it back to 25 minutes, but we will do our best. It will be a masterclass given by our psychologists Madelief and Jochem. And after the 25 minutes talk, there will be a possibility for questions, and that will be led by our colleague Lisanne. So if you're on the live stream, you can ask your questions in the chat. And if you're here in the audience, feel free to ask your questions after the talk in the microphone that is in front of us. And then happiness, well, a big subject. Someone told me once there are 3 aspects in happiness. One is someone nice to love. The second one is something nice to do. And then the third one is something to dream of. I would say that's a very short summary of happiness, but at least for me, that I always kept that in mind. And I think in a way it's quite a good summary, but let's dive into it because it's a process, happiness. So it takes time, it will take time to elaborate on it, and I would like to give the floor to Madelief to tell us more.
So hi at the audience and hi who's watching from home. Really glad to be here in Berlin instead of being in Amsterdam. So today Jochem and I will gonna tell you a little bit more about happiness. So as Gijs already told you, what is happiness? So that can be really different for everyone, but we see that everyone wants to be happy. And as our physical health, our mental health is also something we have to work on every day. It's not something that's there all the time. You have to work on it. So what does happiness actually means, and when do you feel happiest? So unfortunately, we don't gonna tell you how you can be happy all the time, because there's no such thing like that. And we all have to face difficult situations, and we all have negative emotions. So that's all part of life. So there's no happy life. But we want to tell you a little bit more how you can integrate more happiness in your daily life. So we don't pretend to be happiness gurus, but we want to take you through the highlights of happiness. So, I'm really curious, what does happiness mean to you? So if you think about it, also when you're watching from home, think about this question. So is there someone of the audience who would like to answer this question? What does happiness mean to you?
Being content.
Being content. Yes? Fulfilled? Something else maybe that's popping into your mind? Sense of belonging. Yeah. Yeah. Fun. Also fun, yeah. Pleasure. No deadlines. That's a really good one. No deadlines means more happiness. Well, maybe. Let's see. And when do you feel happiest? On what kind of moments do you feel happy? Is it during a specific activity maybe, or if you think about an experience in the past? On vacation at the beach, yeah. When you achieve something, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Spontaneous, yeah. Really good. So we see that happiness means a lot of different things, right? And it's quite personal. It's different for everyone, I can imagine. So if we look into the research about happiness, we see a lot of different definitions. So many, I don't know if my microphone is still working. So if we look into happiness, that's about all the facets in life. and past emotional experiences and emotional reactions. So that means that it's not only about the positive things in life, but also the less positive things in life that you experienced. So that's all part of happiness. And if we summarize this together, we like this definition the most. So that's where Jochem and I will lead you through. So if we think about happiness, we see that it is a state characterized by contentment and general satisfaction with one's current situation. So someone of the audience already told us it's about contentment. Yes, that's also what we think that happiness means. So overall, you're really content with your life, how it is right now. We see also that there are a lot of misinterpretations about happiness. So when you ask people, what does happiness means for you? We also hear some things like pleasure, fun. We already heard it from the audience. But actually that's something different than happiness. Of course it is part of happiness, but it doesn't mean the same as happiness. Because we see that happiness is a more stable state. So it's there for a long term. It's there to stay. And pleasure is something that comes by and goes away. So you can compare it with a wave. It comes and it goes. So maybe when you're doing a pleasurable activity, doing sports, I don't know, for example, hockey or football, or going to a party, maybe have some drinks, some alcohol, you have some pleasure and you feel really fun. And maybe you think, okay, on these kind of moments, I really feel happy. Now I'm only happy. But actually that's not the same, because it only sticks around for a few minutes, and happiness is about contentment in general. So that's a misinterpretation about happiness. And here you can see a quote: finding happiness makes us happy, and seeking happiness makes us actually unhappy. So we see that if we focus too much on happiness, finding happiness, it actually makes us unhappy, because we are over-focusing on finding happiness. So it's there, and if it's there, then it's just there. You know it. It's a feeling. This is a quote from a Belgian psychiatric, and I really like it. And he says, we want to avoid fear, and just then we become afraid. And if we want to avoid unhappiness and embrace happiness, just then we become unhappy. So that's also the same I just told you. If you don't want to be unhappy and you try to avoid an unhappy feeling, then you just become unhappy, because we all feel sometimes like, crap, I think, and that's quite normal. That's also part of life. You can't feel happy all the time, and there's no pleasure all the time. That's there and it goes away. So I would like to tell you a little bit more about the science of happiness, also called the positive psychology. That's a movement in psychology founded by Martin Seligman in 2000. And it's different from the traditional psychology because the traditional psychology focus on mental disorders and treatment for these kind of disorders. So we want to help people who don't feel well. So make them from feeling a 3 to feeling them as a 6. And the positive psychology is really focusing on your strengths and what is already going really well. So maybe you feel like a 6, and the positive psychology say, hey, that can be better. Maybe you can feel like an 8. So it's really about strengthening, increasing your well-being and your strengths. So that's a different approach than the more traditional way of psychology. So the founder of the positive psychology, Martin Seligman, says that a traditional psychology also should focus on the more positive sides of life. So he says that a positive psychology also dive into what can be better, so the challenges someone's struggling with, or healing some sickness or repairing what is broken. But he says that it's also good to focus on what's already going really well. So your qualities, your strengths, and building on the best in life. So what makes life most worth living? That's positive psychology. I actually really like it. And he aims to strengthen your well-being and increase your resilience. And this will lead to more happiness. So actually it's a question about yeah, I don't know, gardening. Huh? So do you only remove the weeds in your garden, or do you also want to plant some bushes and some flowers to make it extra or more beautiful? So that's a different approach. And this founder, Martin Seligman, says that there are 5 different components which are really important to find more happiness and increase your well-being. So he uses this model, Perma model. I don't know if you already heard of it sometimes. But he says that it's all important. So I just told you a little bit more about pleasure. That's also part of happiness, but not everything in happiness. But it's really important to have more positive emotions. And we all experience nowadays, some negative emotions as well. That's quite normal. But it's really important to focus more on the positive emotions. So for example, you can think about joy, pleasure, love, gratitude. That's all really important. And then there is engagement. And engagement, you can see it as a flow. And being in a flow means that time is stopping for you. And you're completely absorbed in an activity. And that's a flow. So an example of myself, I did a workshop last Sunday. It's called macramé. I don't know if you heard of it. Yes, I see some people. It's almost the same as knitting, I think. Knitting. And time stopped by for me. So it was 4 hours later, and I was like, how is that even possible? Because I thought I'm not creative at all. But yeah, I was really absorbed in the activity. And Martin Seligman says that it's really important to have some flow in your life, to have some engagement with an activity. And then relationships, also really important. So no matter if you are more introvert or extrovert, we are all social creatures, and we need some deep connection with other people, like really deep relationships. And not only in a romantic relationship, but also relationship with your colleagues or your family, friends. That's all really important to have in your life. And then meaning, also called purpose. So what are you here for? Where do you come out of your bed for? What do you think is really important? And where do you want to work on? And that's quite of a big question. It's not something that you can, answer. Some people can, but mostly it's a process you're in for, a long time to find out what your purpose is. And then accomplishments. So you can imagine that if you know what your purpose is, that it's really helpful to set some goals to reach to this purpose. And if you achieve some goals, that really gives you some intrinsic motivation and satisfaction. So he says that is really important. Not focusing on one of these 5 parts, but all the 5 components are really important to have more well-being in your life. So how can we actually focus on the important things around happiness in our daily life instead of trying so hard to be happier? So that's something Jochem is going to tell you.
So, very happy to be here as well. Let's see if we can put some of these things that Madelief just shared with us into practice. Again, pretty funny that we're here in the middle of Berlin and 2 of the most Dutch-sounding names ever are doing this presentation. So yeah, what I'm trying to look into with all of you actually, and again, feel free to ask any questions you may have, and I'd also like to invite you, if you want to take some notes of some of the things that I'm saying here, you think maybe I want to think about this after I'm done talking, feel free to write down some of this stuff, especially when you're at home. You can actually pause this video as well. So we're looking into these habits of happiness, or these happy habits, as I'd like to call them. And we're using this same Perma model Seligman invented there as a sort of a overview, something to reflect on, and how would I actually put that into practice. So let's dive straight into the first one. So these positive emotions, and as we heard at the beginning, this is probably the most obvious one, right? You want to feel more happiness in your life. See if you can build more positive emotions. Of course. So I think it's still important to relay that focus on what are we actually talking about, what are the things when I'm reflecting at the end of a day, am I talking about the things that went wrong, or am I talking about the things that actually went quite right? But one of the emotions that I really picked out here is, I think, one that is really interesting, which is gratitude. And I think it's interesting because when we're looking at, for instance, religions worldwide, almost every one of them has some sort of a ritual which has to do with gratitude, right? If we look at Buddhists, for instance, they have meditation. A lot of those times go, if you have experience with that, maybe go about gratitude. When we look at Christianity, for instance, praying is all about gratitude. And it's interesting when we look at the research about that this has a lot of big effects on your life to practice daily gratitude. Doesn't seem to matter that much what type of gratitude you're practicing, just the practice of actually doing that has major effects on your immune system, your lifespan, and of course, when it comes to positive psychology, your well-being as well. So there's two things that I wanted to sort of pick out there, which the first one is maybe you could think about somebody that has been there for you when maybe you were having a rough time, or just looking back at the last period. What is somebody that you feel should, deserve a little gratitude? And maybe you could write a little letter to that person, because then it goes both ways. You're making somebody else happier because it's always fun to receive a letter like that. And then also probably when you're doing that, you're going to feel that gratitude yourself. And when it comes to that last notion, I think for most people it's a common one, but to give this a try, maybe try for a week to at the end of every day start your own gratitude diary, right? To write down at least 3 things that you're grateful for. And what I often get as a psychologist when people are asking me, so I don't have that much to be grateful for, or it has to be these big, huge things like, I don't know, graduating or getting a new job promotion. I'm like, no, it's not. It's not about that. It's actually about little things as well, that you take a little time in the morning to drink a cup of coffee and you felt that was actually, you're tasting that. You can be grateful for that as well. And when it comes to those experience, I think it's really good to look into that next one, into that engagement. Malif was just talking about flow, which is one of my favorite things as well. I'm pretty sure I'm experiencing it right now. This is always the tricky part when you're at a time-limited presentation. But it's that's what's happening, right? It's having that experience of really being in that moment. So it's, I put the quote in there, being one with the music is something that research really shows helps us to feel more of that happiness on the long run as well. And I think sort of the sad part here is that the way we organize our society in this matter is that we are receiving loads and loads and loads of stimuli towards the day, like information via the phones, via everything that's happening all the time. And I think this causes the average human to be a bit more reactive, right? Because we're just sort of, every moment we're taking, maybe subconsciously, we're sort of taking a breather instead of sort of looking inwards to see what's there. And I think it's stopping us sometimes from achieving that level of engagement that we would, that would actually be better for us, to become more proactive and actually taking care of our own flow and taking care of ourselves as well. Because it doesn't matter what that would look like for you, right? Self-care. Because it's different for everyone. Like when I'm asking people, do you ever take a day off to just care about yourself? I'm hearing wild stories on what the people would actually be doing on that day. And I think that's okay. I think just having that little bit of attention for just you and your own well-being helps a lot. So that's definitely an exercise that you could do. I mean, it starts with the basic, like rest, cleanliness, routine. Are you clean? That already does some mental thing, right? I'm often seeing that with depressive persons, right? That if they manage to get out of bed, take a shower, that this is already sort of the first win of the day. But I think that's a question for you as well, for the audience at home and the people here. When do you get totally absorbed in an activity? And then, the follow-up question, of course, would be, can you do that more often? Which I think brings us, if we have these, because usually flow is a bit more of a personal experience, right? Something that we're doing on our own, but then we're not solely individuals, right? We're always performing in these social contexts. And this is, of course, why relationships is one of the basic founding things when we're talking about well-being and happiness. It was actually interesting because I was, of course, preparing myself for this talk, and I was looking back into the research again, which made me think, right, this is such a core thing, and what has happened to me, at least over the last year and a half, maybe 2, or I don't know, feels like a decade to me. I noticed that especially all these friends and these social contacts that were a bit more in the periphery of my social network I was sort of losing touch with these people, not intentionally, just sort of with all the rules that was going on. I was really focusing on the close group of friends, which I feel grateful for again. But this sort of started me thinking again, and I started reaching out to some of the other people as well, people I haven't spoken over the last 2 years, and really brought up some wonderful conversations again. And I think when it comes to your current group of friends or your social network, I think it's really, really important to be honest. Because when I'm asking people, which is, again, one of the things that we love asking people, what are your energy gainers and drainers, right? Then people often say, it's really giving me energy to be in contact with other people and to spend time with my friends. And then, I get a bit critical sometimes. I say, really? All of your friends? You're sure all of your friends are giving you that much energy? And then usually people say, well, not all of them. Like, all right, so what is the balance there, right? How often do you how much time are you spending with the people that are giving you some energy back as well, and how much time are you spending with people that are draining some of your energy? It's not a bad thing, but it's definitely something to keep track of, right? How are we interacting with those people around us? Which I think when we're moving throughout this model from a more personal view to a more interpersonal view and then to a sort of broader view, we're coming to this level of meaning, which is purpose. I think you can summarize fairly easily to be able to do something you're good at and something you're good for, to be able to contribute to something usually larger than yourself. And this is a big question. Like Madeleine said, you're usually working with that for a long time. I think it's an interesting question because what is my purpose is something that I get across a lot. But I think a good starting point for that is to figure out what your own values are, right? So what is some things that are actually important to you as a person? How would you describe that? And often when I give that as a starting point, people reflect back to me and say, yeah, that doesn't actually help because I don't know what my values are either. So what I'd like to do at that point is to ask people, so what does your life resume look like? Your CV, your, what is that, curriculum vitae? But not actually concerning your job, but your entire life. What kind of ups and downs have you had in your life? What kind of, and what have they brought you? And then usually people start thinking either via the sort of the negative route, sort of big life events that may have affected you, but then also really on the positive side, what are your proudest moments? They usually teach us a lot about what it is we find important. And then having that sense of, I made all these decisions in the past, they were probably based on something. If I can name that, this probably gives me a first direction into what my purpose might be. Which I think brings us really into accomplishment. Because if we know in what sort of general direction we're heading for, then we can start setting goals and we can start looking towards what is it actually that I would like to accomplish. And I think the main thing that we're forgetting here as we're moving from one goal to another, and at least something that I've experienced over the last years, whenever we reach that goal, we're sort of on to the next one, right? Whereas it's really important to take a little bit of time and reflect on that and celebrate that as well. Like whatever celebration would mean for you, maybe you need to buy a bottle of champagne and start celebrating somewhere, and maybe you need to treat yourself for a little weekend off. Whatever it may be, celebrate that. Because I think that being able to notice what you're already getting is one of the most valuable things, and that's something that really ups your sense of accomplishment. And when it comes to setting these goals, it's really important to focus on intrinsic growth, to focus on the things that help you grow as a person and not just as the person you present yourself to be. So it could be anything, right? Maybe you want to be able to learn how to deal with stress more effectively, or you just want to be able to form more deeper relationships. Whatever it may be that intrinsic growth may mean for you is usually something that gives us more sense of accomplishment and is better for your well-being again. And I think at this point, feel free to challenge yourself a little bit. I think as we're nearing to the end there, what else? There's a little bit of text on this slide here, but I think that's some of the most important points. Of course, like Malif said as well, they are all important. And they're also all contributing to this certain thing. So there's not just one thing that you should probably work on, but usually all of them. But when I'm saying that, it's probably good to focus on the one that you are sort of missing out the most of, and then you can see it usually has this sort of bleeding over effect into the other areas. Like I mentioned, these external factors usually don't give us the sense of happiness that we're getting from. So really sort of, because we tend to get used to it, right? I think that's one of our biggest strengths as human beings, that we're able to adapt to so many different circumstances, and I think that's exactly one of the things that sometimes stops us from being content or happy. And I think it's more important to be able to look at it, to gain a different perspective on all emotions, even negative ones, and if we're able to accept that and able to deal with these negative emotions, we get much better mental states and general well-being as human. I think that's one of the biggest challenges we're facing right now. So I think before I round off, I would actually before we head into the Q&A, I would actually give you, for the audience here, because we actually need a minute to sort of sit down, to wonder this. One of my favorite questions, the miracle question, or Wunderfrage, since we're here in Germany anyways. If a miracle happened overnight, right? If all the things that are stopping you from reaching your full potential overnight, if they would disappear, what would you do? What would you be doing? Really invite you to think about that for a minute, maybe write down your first things, or maybe when we're done here, start talking about that, because this is usually where it becomes really interesting. Thank you for your time.
Done? Yeah, it's working. Jochem and Madelief, thank you very much for this interesting talk on happiness. It got me thinking, the Wunderfrage, and I'm actually not quite sure yet.
No,
It's
just
a
think
big
about
question,
it.
right?
It is.
It's normal that you cannot answer it maybe
No.
right away, right?
I think it's even better to think about it
Yeah.
some longer. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll discuss a bit more on it later on, maybe. It's time for the Q&A. If there are any questions in the room, you can hop over to the microphone in front of the room here, and then ask your question to one of our psychologists, to Jochem or Madelief. If you have a question back home, you can ask it in the chat box. It's on the right of your screen. And we also have some questions sent in up front. And I actually would like to start with one of those questions, because I think it's very interesting. Because someone asked us, to what extent is your level of happiness genetic?
All right, yeah, sort of the basic nature-nurture conversation. I think that's always a question that pops up, right? How much can I actually do? And there's been some research done on this as well, where, as usually is the case with genetics, about 50% of that is hereditary, is genetic, and there's definitely a difference in how people tend to, what sort of baseline they have. But I think then and then it's about 10%, which is really sort of life circumstances. The fact is, it's just going to be really hard to be happy when you don't have any food or you're in a very sort of traumatic experience. But then I think the good news is that still 40% is really your outlook on life, is really the way that you sort of interact with that. So I think that really brings hope, and especially if you're already in fairly good circumstances, there's still 40% of the things you could do to change your own happiness.
And actually, so only 10% of things that are happening outside of you affect your happiness.
Right.
So maybe sometimes when you feel at work or when something bad happens, it feels like everything falls out of place and everything is crappy. But in the end, maybe knowing that it's only 10% that's part of your happiness, it's not affecting your happiness that much.
Oh, right, yeah, I think especially with negative
It's
events,
comforting.
we tend to overestimate how big the effect is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Is there, by accident, a question from the...
Oh, I can see some
I
movement
see
here.
someone. There we go.
To what extent does happiness over time normalizes? Like if you have a certain level of happiness and nothing changes, is it then normalizing, and is it decreasing the experience of happiness?
You want to take it?
Yeah, I don't know if my microphone still works. Well, as I already told you, happiness is more like contentment and being satisfied. So you don't have to feel happiness all the time. It's just there. So maybe you get used to it, but it's really good to savoring. So stand still by what you experienced and make it a moment maybe to enjoy it even more, and then it could be that you feel more happy. But in the end, it's about contentment and satisfaction, I think. Do you want something to add, maybe?
Well, I think it's an interesting thing, right? Because that's exactly what it's about. Because we tend to have all these experience and we tend to have these hopes and dreams. Like, if I reach this, then it's probably good. Or I'm still doing fairly well, but I can't wait to actually have that bigger car, that better job, that prettier looking partner, whatever it may be for you, right? But we get used to that. And I think it's really about having that focus on other things. Because I think that happiness is one of the things that happens along the way. Right? We can at some point look back and then realize, oh, it's actually a very good period. And that's fine.
Yeah. It's the seeking versus the being.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Where you started with.
Yeah.
And another question someone sent us was, I wake up and I don't feel really happy for some reason. Is there a quick tip, a quick hack I can do to feel better right away? It's always on that, right?
So this one really resonates with me. This is actually one I was really struggling with for a long time in my life, because I noticed that every time, and maybe you have this as well, right? Every time that I was already awake and maybe had my coffee, then sort of the ideas would come and I would sort of enjoy life. But usually the first thing when I was waking up was like, do I really have to get out of bed at this point? So there's, I think, a couple of things that you could do with that. And I think the biggest change for me is to not focus on everything that's going to happen on the day, the moment I wake up, because it's a lot, right? At least I tend to plan a lot of things in my day. What I try to do is focus on the very first step I want to take. And usually that's the very, very first step out of the bed. And I try to tell myself, all right, it's the right time, you got out, very good. And now the first step is actually get into a shower. And then I manage to get into a shower, and then I'm thinking there, standing in the shower thinking, breakfast. And then I'm going for breakfast. And even though that routine is the same every day, I try to focus on just the very next thing. And once I've done all that, then I start making my to-do list, and not before. So I think that helps. And then, there's rituals, there's meditating in the morning that help as well.
Just take it one step at a time,
Yeah.
and don't be maybe frightened by the overview of the day ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Cool. Is there any other question maybe from the audience? Then I will continue here. This is a question we got from someone who has experienced a burnout right now. And she asks, I have a burnout and I'm having a hard time motivating myself. What can I do to feel more positive in general?
Yeah, I can imagine. It's quite hard to motivate yourself in this situation. I think it's all about rest, cleanliness, and a routine, as you told us before. So also taking little steps, maybe talking to other people how you feel, it can help, but also some routine. So wake up at the same time every day, eat at the same time, maybe go for a walk, go outside. So it's quite hard if you are in a burnout to motivate yourself, of course, because otherwise you wouldn't be in a burnout. So don't be too strict for yourself to get motivated again. It's quite a hard time you're having and experiencing. So try to open up to other people, see how they can help you maybe with some things. And routine, it can really help you.
Yeah, and then indeed maybe accept that there sometimes are days that it's hard.
Yeah.
And that actually what you told in the masterclass, that those negative feelings are always part of life. They will always be there.
Yeah.
And they're part of being happy again.
Yeah, and don't try to push them away, because otherwise it would become worse.
Yeah. And indeed opening up and telling what you feel can only, by telling it can also relieve a bit of the tension or the anxiety or whatever you're feeling.
Yeah, and also ask other people for help if you need it.
Yeah. Cool, thanks.
I think if that step is still too much, because honestly that's one of the most heard phrases the first few minutes of one of our consults is, I felt a lot of resistance into actually coming here, which I really get, right? It is such a big step, and it sometimes worries me that we're not even seeing the people that haven't had the guts yet to actually do that. And I think for those people that feel like, I know I should talk, but I don't know how, start by just writing down, start by sort of telling it to yourself. and then maybe you can take that next step. But that already is often useful to sort of write down whatever's happening inside of you. It already makes it more bearable, I think. Yeah.
Easier to open up later on, maybe.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. That's a good tip, I think. And this is a question I could have sent it in myself. Maybe I did. We will never know. But I resonate with this one a lot. Someone asked, like, I have a nice appointment plan with some friends, and I made the appointment like a week ago, and then it's that day. The appointment is, and then I don't feel like it anymore.
Yeah.
He says, like, often when the time comes, I don't feel like it anymore, and what can I do about it? What can I do to make me feel like it again?
Yeah, really interesting question. I would advise to ask yourself the question, so what is it that is holding you back? So is it because you're too tired, or are you not used anymore to see other people? I can imagine in this time, especially, we don't have that much social connection as we did before. So maybe you're not used to it anymore, or does it cost you too much energy? Maybe it is about, the friendship, like Jochem told us. Not every friendship is the same, so maybe it costs too much energy. It's about the connection you have, or what do you really want, or what do you need? So what is holding you actually back? And if it's because you need some more rest, you're too tired because of work or something, maybe then it's interesting for yourself to see, hey, do I say too easy yes to an appointment? Is it better to maybe have some spontaneous appointments to see if I'm actually into it? So ask yourself, what do you need?
Yeah, and don't plan too much.
Yeah, maybe. Some people like it, but a lot of people think that's normal to do, but actually find it quite hard because we're all busy with, I don't know, study, work, sports, life, and it can be too much or too overwhelming.
Yeah.
So that's also about your values. What
Yeah.
do you value? What do you need?
What do you want in life?
Yeah.
Exactly. I think there's a question coming up.
Yeah, I kind of have a kind of related question to that. So I always have a bit of the problem of, for example, when I have a group of friends and we try to find the next time when we can actually meet, then with 3, 4, 5 people finding the next slot, that's like sometimes 2-3 months in advance,
Yeah.
and then somehow my calendar builds up with events, and I already know what I'm going to do the next 3 to 4 months on each weekend. And I'm struggling a bit with this balance of I want to meet these people and I want to have these events because they're all nice things, but somehow there is like no evening or weekend or time for myself. But I also can't. I also don't want to say no and not meeting these people because I'm gonna have a good time with them. But that's how I'm kind of like struggling a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Super
right.
relatable.
Yeah,
For us as well, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you like if you're at home watching these, you can't see it, but there's an whole audience of people. Who and I think that's exactly what it is. This is one of the struggles that we're having, right? I often use the example because it's a surplus of choice. It's this immense sort of also social wealth that we're experiencing now. It's more easy than ever to connect to all these different people, and they're all coming with great ideas, right? And it's pretty much everywhere. When I go to a supermarket and I want to buy some peanut butter, there's literally a meter to a meter of just peanut butter choices I can make, right? And I think that's sort of what is happening. And that forces us to make decisions. And wherever we're making a decision, usually a bit of fear comes in for what we're missing out, the fear of missing out, the whole FOMO thing that is happening a lot. And I think one of the most important things that we're often missing is that we don't actually plan that time for ourselves. Whenever we do, we don't value it as much as time that could be spent with other people. And especially if you're living a busy social life. And again, irregardless if you're extroverted or introverted or whatever personality you may have, I truly believe that everybody in a very busy society should take time off every now and then, and that it should be as equally as important as these other things. So I think when it comes to that, and making sure if you know your calendar is going to be filled 3 months in advance, you got to have these moments of break planned out also 3 months in advance. It can be, as if I had to make that really practical, it can be that as well. And I think in the meantime, it is connecting back to that. What is actually important to you, and do you have your focus on that, or are you just running to the next person shouting your name, right? I think that's the question to answer there.
Yeah, maybe also JOMO. It's called the joy of missing out.
The joy of missing
Yeah,
out.
actually, sometimes it's really good.
Good.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that one before. That's
Yeah,
good.
I do it myself. It helps. Yeah.
And I also hear a bit of the reactive versus proactive. Like, are you gonna wave along with all the appointments people want to make with you,
Yeah.
or are you gonna ask yourself, like, what do I need? Maybe I don't want to plan, and I will say, like, okay, I will come back to you in 3 months and let you know if I will join that appointment or so.
Yeah, expectation management maybe.
Yeah.
And I think it's also interesting to experiment with sort of last minute cancels, because what I had for a long time, like, I really don't feel like this, I'm drained, I didn't manage this right, but still, I really can't sort of bring myself there, but I would still go, right? I would still meet up them and then maybe have a drink, and then, you know, you would sort of get into it, and at the end of the day, I'd be really sort of drained. But because often we feel like people would sort of instantly drop us the moment we cancel an appointment, and, you know, try it, and probably they're not going to instantly drop it if you just skip every once in a while. I think it's okay. We're all having a lot of things to do.
Cool. Does it answer your question? Yeah, perfect. I want to ask one last question from the ones we got via email. Also because I think it's very relatable for a lot of people, because it's about social media. And she says, like, I feel less happy when I check my social media accounts because everybody seems, of course, to have a better time than I am. And what can I do to cope with that better without having to delete it?
Yeah.
I do want to check it, but I don't want to feel shitty afterwards.
I think the most important thing is to be realistic about this, because a lot of people are showing their best part of life, right? So I also put pictures there for my vacations, holidays, and when I'm having fun with my friends, but not if I feel shit, or no one does actually. So you only see the highlights of someone's life, so that's not the real life. So it's really important to keep that in mind, and don't compare yourself with other people too much. It is not helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's quite hard, I can imagine. But you're seeing a lot of great stuff, and you're like, oh, do I have to do that
Yeah.
also? Or I want to be part of that. But yeah, those are only the highlights. So, and it can help to don't check your Instagram or whatever channel too much.
Yeah.
So you don't have to delete it. It can be a possibility. But also not checking it too much. It really helps.
Yeah.
Sort of put yourself on a diet when it comes to social media.
Yeah.
And I think also putting yourself, sort of doing a little check-in before you start opening your, I don't know, your Instagram, your TikTok, whatever it may be. Am I feeling up for it right now? Because what we often do, and sadly we have that tendency whenever we feel miserable to doing exactly those things, right? And then I'm feeling miserable and they're doing so great. What is wrong with me, right? So we're asking ourselves these questions, which usually are making it worse. But I think when you're feeling okay about yourself, which I think most people, it's something that you call it a wave, right? Something that sort of curves in the day, and you're doing it in one of the moments that you're actually feeling okay. It can be a source of inspiration as well. When I'm feeling quite happy about myself and I'm checking social media and I see somebody, I don't know, going surfing on Lombok, I'm like, I want to do that. This is actually how I started surfing in Lombok, but that's a different story. Yeah. So and in that sense, it can be an inspiration, but I think it's really about limiting yourself and reading yourself before getting into that.
Yeah, and being realistic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a practical tip, I think.
Yeah.
I once did a detox for like a month, and then I skipped it for a month, and afterwards it was less in my system to just open my phone and go there.
It's like a habit, right? You check it all the time.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And it's really helpful to do so as well.
Yeah. And healthy.
Okay. Thank you guys for telling us more about being happy, answering these questions, and if there are any other questions right now or maybe later on, you can always send us an email. Or, of course, schedule a consultation with one of our psychologists, maybe Jochem or Madeleine, or any other of our psychologists. Just go to openup.com, and thank you for watching and listening, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you.